My father did not deserve to die at all. He did not deserve to get killed. In any way, shape, or form, he did not pose any threat at all. Come court, there's no way that this could be justified. There's no way possible.
After reviewing the investigation conducted by the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Brown's death, while tragic, was justified.
Don't say no more. Don't say no more. Don't say no more.
Brown ignored the officer's commands and backed his car until he was blocked by the rear of his residence. Brown then put the car in drive and turned the steering wheel left directly at law enforcement officers who had now surrounded his vehicle. As Brown's car starts forward, Deputy Lunsford was now positioned directly in front of the vehicle, and all officers were shouting commands to stop. Brown ignored the commands and drove directly at Deputy Lunsford. Deputy Lunsford used his left hand to push off of the hood. It was at this moment
that he knew he fucked up.
Just one day after last week's verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, the police apparently shot in incredibly bizarre and barbaric circumstances a man named Andrew Brown Jr. when, as CNN puts it, they attempted to serve him with an arrest warrant. And that is generally how the media has been presenting it. But Adrian, we were talking before the show, and you pointed out that that is very much not how the police have actually described what happened. So what have they been saying?
So initially, when there was a kind of a conference with the sheriff of that county, he said unequivocally that it was a search warrant. And he said even, I can confirm that it was on execution of a search warrant.
Brown shot and killed yesterday morning in Elizabeth City while deputies were executing an arrest warrant. Tonight, the sheriff reports that warrant was for a felony drug charge.
Well, authorities were attempting to serve an arrest warrant.
Deputies were reportedly executing warrants related to felony drug charges when Brown was killed.
Brown was shot and killed by sheriff's deputies a week ago while they were trying to serve an arrest warrant.
When there was a kind of a conference with the sheriff of that county, he said unequivocally that it was a search warrant.
I'm Pasquotank County Sheriff Tommy Wooten. And I'm Chief Deputy Daniel Fogg. Our deputies attempted to serve the arrest warrant. They fired the shots. They've been put on administrative leave until we know all the facts.
It was a search warrant. And he said even, I can confirm that it was on execution of a search warrant. Nothing about an arrest warrant.
Nothing about an arrest warrant. This is an arrest warrant surrounding felony drug charges. Mr. Brown was a convicted felon with a history of resisting arrest. Our training and our policies indicate under such circumstances there is a high risk of danger.
Brown was killed by sheriff's deputies in Elizabeth City. This is in North Carolina during an attempt to serve drug-related search and arrest warrants.
Authorities claiming they were trying to carry out an arrest warrant for felony drug charges.
It was on execution of a search warrant.
While the officer-involved shooting that resulted in the death of Andrew Brown occurred on Wednesday, April 21st, law enforcement involvement with Mr. Brown began in the weeks prior and put the wheels in motion that eventually led to the attempted service of arrest and search warrants on April 21.
The community deserves to know what happened. They deserve transparency.
Brown is a convicted felon with a history of resisting arrest. There is body cam video showing the attempt to arrest Brown. Only a judge can order the release of that video.
Andrew Brown was a good person. He was about to get his kids back. He was a good father. Now his kids won't never see him again.
In the early months of this year, Detective Johnson with the Dare County Sheriff's Office received information from a reliable confidential source that Andrew Brown Jr. from Elizabeth City was selling drugs in Dare County. Detective Johnson contacted Pasquotank County and confirmed Mr. Brown's identity and that he is a known drug dealer.
Andrew Brown was a good person.
He is a known drug dealer. Upon learning this information, Detective Johnson, with the aid of the confidential informant, made 2 undercover buys from Brown on March 17th, 2021 and March 29th, 2021. Those buys were of cocaine and heroin, respectively.
He was about to get his kids back.
A later SBI lab analysis determined that the heroin was laced with fentanyl.
The attorney for Brown's family speaking today, saying Brown was not armed and was shot while trying to get away.
It's my understanding Mr. Brown was not armed.
Brown then put the car in drive and turned the steering wheel left directly at law enforcement officers who had now surrounded his vehicle.
It's my understanding Mr. Brown was not armed.
As Brown's car starts forward, Deputy Lunsford was now positioned directly in front of the vehicle, and all officers were shouting commands to stop. Brown ignored the commands and drove directly at Deputy Lunsford.
And the bullets entered into the back of the vehicle as though he was leaving the scene.
The first shot was fired by Sergeant Meads, and it entered the front windshield of Mr. Brown's car.
And the bullets entered into the back of the vehicle as though he was leaving the scene.
Let me say that again. It entered the front windshield of Mr. Brown's car.
Well, we have a saying where I'm from. And that saying is, I was born at night, but not last night. There was a shot fired. When the shot was fired, he put the car in reverse, putting several feet, if not yards, away from the police who were there.
Even after backing into a corner with no escape, but to maneuver his vehicle directly at the officers, Brown continued the felonious assault by using his vehicle as a deadly weapon and made contact a second time with Deputy Lunsford. As Brown's car starts forward, Deputy Lunsford was now positioned directly in front of the vehicle, and all officers were shouting commands to stop. Brown ignored the commands and drove directly at Deputy Lunsford. Deputy Lunsford used his left hand to push off of the hood. It was at this moment that the first shot is fired.
He turned his wheel to the left to turn it away from the law enforcement officers. At no point did we ever see any police officers behind his vehicle.
At no point did we ever see any police officers behind his vehicle.
Brown ignored the commands and drove directly at Deputy Lunsford.
At no point did we ever see Mr. Brown make contact with law enforcement.
Brown had made two aggressive driving moves, which caused his vehicle to contact Deputy Lunsford on both occasions. Deputy Lunsford used his left hand to push off of the hood. It was at this moment that the first shot is fired.
We were able to see where they possibly reached out to make contact to him, but we did not see any actions on Mr. Brown's part where he made contact with them or tried to go in their direction.
Deputy Lunsford then spun out of the way to avoid being run over by Brown's vehicle.
While there was a group of law enforcement that were in front of him, he went the opposite direction. As he turned to the left to go across his yard,
Brown's car continued forward, passing Deputy Lunsford, Deputy Morgan, and Sergeant Meads, and several shots are heard.
A second shot was fired, and as he began to accelerate and increase his speed,
one shot entered the passenger window and struck Brown in the shoulder. Several more entered the rear passenger side door and window.
When his car was clearly across the yard, at all times what we saw were police officers standing on the pavement unloading their weapons.
Brown's vehicle then accelerated across the vacant lot next to 421 Perry Street, and 5 additional shots entered the rear windshield and trunk of Brown's vehicle.
At all times what we saw were police officers standing on the pavement unloading their weapons.
At this moment, Brown was driving directly at Investigator Johnson, who was positioned on Roanoke Avenue in an unmarked white van.
At no point, let me be very clear, at no point did we see Mr. Brown pose a threat to the law enforcement officers that were there.
Lieutenant Judd was positioned on the corner of Roanoke and Perry in an unmarked white Crown Victoria. Brown's car narrowly missed striking the van operated by Investigator Johnson, who accelerated to avoid the collision.
My friends, I would suggest to you that it was absolutely and unequivocally unjustified.
The law does not require officers in a tense and dangerous situation to wait until the moment a suspect uses a deadly weapon to act to stop the suspect.
They don't need to say any more. Just show the video. Why would you shoot a man in the back going away from you? That's one of the most cowardly things a person can do. And yet it happens over and over again to black people, especially black men in America. You know, they don't shoot white men in the back.
The shooting death of Zachary Hammond is exactly the kind of case that shows the value of dash cam or body cam video. Police say he was a threat to them because he drove his car at them, but an autopsy says he was shot in the back through the driver's window. Video could clear up what happened.
All along, local police blamed the unarmed young man, saying he tried to run the officer over with his car, calling it attempted murder in the police report.